So I'm going to introduce this morning's presentation it's called Beyond the Ballot Box, Building a Movement Beyond the Ballot Box. We're going to have a brief presentation from these three presenters, Helena Wong, Sanoa Myers-Fox, and Jamie McCallum. I'll let them introduce themselves. We could give them a round of applause.
Yay!
All right, without further ado.
Okay. Yes, right into the mic.
Okay. I'm actually known for being pretty loud too, so. All right, good morning, y'all. How is everybody doing?
Good morning. Wonderfully.
Awesome. It's really nice to see you guys here on this second morning. Yesterday was really super inspiring for me. And yeah, I talked to a bunch of people and feel like there's just so much rich conversations that are happening. And I'm really glad that this conversation is happening today. Because we all know that we're in a really kind of fascinating historical moment, right? And actually, Grassroots Global Justice Alliance, where I'm from, we actually don't do electoral organizing work. We never have. And actually, in the last kind of couple months, we've been really kind of grappling with that question, with the question of what moment are we at currently? Because so for us, we're still not going to be doing kind of electoral organizing work, but I think we do have to look at kind of what the conditions are right now, right? We hosted a call last month with Black Lives Matter and Not One More, specifically on white rage and the state of our movements and the elections. And we did this because so many members of GDJ, so many of you all are are grappling with these questions. And what we're seeing is that this is not it's not an isolated moment, right, that we're in, but actually it's the result of organizing by both the left and the right. And so the mobilizations that have been happening around detentions and deportations, around the fight for Black lives, around queer rights, all of this stuff has been work that we've been doing on the ground. And we also know that the Tea Party has been organizing, and the reactionary right has also been organizing. And so the fact that we have Trump and Bernie as candidates speak to kind of the current moment that we're in. And we're also seeing how the established parties, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, have been completely thrown off, right? They really don't know what to do in this moment. So they're just going to do what they always do. And so then that actually then provides some openings and opportunities for us, I think. I don't want to spend too much time on the elections themselves because I feel like that's not the purpose of this conversation. We already know who the top candidates are going to be going into the primaries. I feel like that's really not a question at this point. What I want to speak to about is more about what do we do from here? Right, the reactionary right will continue to mobilize because they know how to do it. Right, they've always done it. We also know that Hillary has been talking about feminism and how she's a feminist, but we've seen that she's like the biggest war hawk ever and doesn't give a crap about the lives of women around the world that she's destroyed. Right. We also know that the established parties are going to continue to push neoliberal agenda, right? And so for us then, at least in GJ, we're thinking about how do we continue to build power in this moment? How do we do what we've been doing and do it better and understand kind of the way that other people are organizing, right? And so for us, we think that what we have to do in this next period is continue to fight the right, the reactionary right, and white rage. That this is something that is really dangerous. It's something that takes all of us, right? We also believe that in this moment we have to continue to support the movement for Black lives and Not One More in detentions and deportations. That actually, if we build our work around racial justice, we will be stronger in building our own power and in fighting the right. The third thing is that we have to continue to push back against the neoliberal agenda because you know what? The condos are still getting built, right? Businesses are still moving and the rich are still getting richer. And these are policies that have always existed that will continue to happen and take place. And so then we have to continue to think about not just Trump, but actually what are we doing around folks who are right next to us. And then speak out against kind of the crazy ideas that are coming out. And so that's what I'll offer for now, and then we'll move it to Sanoa. Thanks.
Okay, I had some notes here, phone notes, or the new paper notes in 2016. How's everyone doing this morning? Are you all running on about like 5 hours of sleep, give or take, like I am? Yeah, okay. So this might not be the most articulate speech that you've ever heard. But so, Helena was kind of talking about what's happening nationally in terms of the election and moving beyond the election, because obviously this is a very contested and important election season, and I'm not going to deny that, especially living in Vermont and Bernie having been mayor of the city that I live in before my time. I wasn't even born yet, but it's okay. I heard he did a lot of really good things. And he's asking for a political revolution. I think his campaign staff has this hashtag that says "not me, us," and I think that that's really important, because even if Bernie does win, or if he doesn't, it's not about him. He's one person, and arguably pretty decent person. I one time, funny story, accidentally smelt his armpit because he's a really awkward grandpa tall dude, and you don't realize how tall he is until he tries to hug you, and so I was just like, oh crap, okay. True story. So that was cool, and he patted me on the back and was like, you guys are doing great work at the Worker Center, yeah, and I just kind of was standing there sucking on a lollipop, it was, anyway. So he's talking about, the not me, us thing, and that's really what we need to be focusing on. When he's talking about building a political revolution, that means we not only need to mobilize, because going to his campaign speeches and phone banking for him, that's great. But we need to be organizing beyond that, because Bernie's not gonna solve white supremacy. Bernie is not gonna solve racism. Bernie is not going to solve the fact that there are disenfranchised communities who are fighting each other instead of fighting the system. Woo! And that's so important. Being a person of color in Vermont and having to constantly come to spaces and have people be like, well, it's really about class. And we just need to organize across class lines, and then everything will be fine. And I'm not saying we don't have to organize across class lines. In fact, one of my favorite philosophers, Antonio Gramsci, I said I would invoke him today, who was an early 20th century philosopher, writer. He wrote some notebooks in code, and people deciphered them, and and he was in prison. Sorry, I should do that. And he talked about how working class and frontline, or what we would call frontline communities now, need to lead this charge of a political revolution because they have the most at stake. And I would agree, we do have the most. I mean, I would include myself as a working class person who makes $26,000 a year, cannot pay my $80,000 in student loan debt, and working a part-time job at a food co-op that's being further and further corporatized, in the within the system of capitalism. And I'm like, okay, I want to fight capitalism. I also need to pay my bills. So how are we going to do this? And so Gramsci was talking about, they need to lead this charge, but we also need to include other classes, and I would say other races as well, because he didn't talk about that. And, so we cannot be okay, well, we can be well, screw the rich people, tax the rich people, or I heard this morning, eat the rich people. I don't really know if I'm going for cannibalism here, but I understand where that's coming from. Sorry, I'm going way beyond my 5 minutes. I'm gonna wrap up. And, but they need to be organized too. They shouldn't be leading. They should not be in power. But when we're talking about, especially in Vermont, where we're like, oh, we're green and sustainable and everything's so wonderful, and look at like my balcony I have overlooking the lake and everything's like so amazing. And meanwhile we have disenfranchised working class white communities living in mobile home parks being like, well, screw you guys, but also, what's easier? Screw the refugee communities that are coming in and getting like food assistance. How come we're not getting food assistance? And everyone's fighting. So we need to organize across those lines. We need to be talking to working class white people. And that's hard. And that's hard for me as a person of color to go into someone's home and tell me that, oh, well, you're black, so you're not good enough. And that's really, that's really hard, I'm sorry, I'm gonna wrap up. I get like, and this whole notion of I don't see color, we're all one race. I'm sorry, I'm hoping there's no small children in the world, but that's bullshit. I'm sorry. As a person of color, as a black woman living in a mostly white state, if you say, I don't see color, that is a privilege that I don't have, because I see color. I see color every single day. And that, because people look at me as if I'm different and alien and not good enough, and that's not okay. That is not okay. Racism exists, especially in the hearts and minds of people who don't believe that racism exists. And that is an important point, and this is what we need to be organizing around. We need to organize disenfranchised communities not to fight us as people of color, but to fight the system that's really screwing them over, So Bernie's not gonna do that. Trump sure as hell's not gonna do that. Hillary's not gonna do that. We're gonna do that. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And good morning. Happy May Day. It's May Day. Or All Species Day, sorry. So my name is Jamie McCallum. I live in Middlebury. I work with the Addison County Organizing Committee of the Worker Center. And I have been, as some of you, more invested, I guess, in electoral politics this election cycle than I have at any other time in my life. I've been sort of fascinated by it. And we just heard a few interesting sort of takes and critiques of what Bernie is not going to do, may or may not going to do. Well, is not going to do, especially when he's not elected. But one thing that I think is important to mention in all this, that Sanoa just hit on at the end, Bernie just fired all his field staff, right? That means whatever slimmer of hope there was, and that there being sort of top-down, bottom-up thing of organizing people at the grassroots for an electoral campaign just disappeared. And that's totally fine. Actually, politicians aren't organizers. We never expected them to be organizers. They're not supposed to be doing it. That's our job. And so now there's this really interesting moment that we have to step into that space and take up some of that stuff that's been generated by all this energy that's come up around Bernie. So I've been just sort of, as a person, to some extent, with some of the other Addison County people from the Worker Center, been talking for a while now with people in Vermont and people in New York, and some people in California, about trying to do such things, trying to take advantage of that momentum, and what kind of organizations, what kind of projects, what kind of proposals can be made to sort of capture the imagination that, to some extent, his campaign raised. You can now talk about anti-capitalism in a way that you couldn't 8 months ago. People like my parents can talk about it in a way they couldn't 8 months ago. And that to me is a really inspiring and really great thing. When we put this workshop together, we were particularly inspired by the comments of one Angela Davis. So I wanted to read that quote as a sort of lead-in to what our small group discussions will be doing this morning. Angela Davis says, talking about elections, even as we participate in this electoral process as it exists today, I think we need to be looking ahead toward a very different kind of political process. At the same time, we put pressure on whoever is running. So I'm actually more interested in helping to develop mass movements that can create the kind of pressure that will force whoever is elected or whoever becomes the candidate to move in more progressive directions. And so this is what we've been talking about for the last, yesterday and for the rest of today here, right? That no matter who wins, no matter who gets elected, we have to be there. And we have to be doing the work that we've been doing to some extent, probably changing our tactics, probably adjusting our strategy, depending who it is. Nonetheless, none of that stuff will happen without us. So I want to read one more thing. That is the question we're going to be sort of answering today in our small groups, which is, and I've shortened it in case anyone has it on those sheets that we passed out. What campaigns, projects, and proposals offer ways forward to unify our struggles, to effectively organize this energy into a movement for real systemic change for the long haul? Again, how can we sort of make the most of what's going on, of this moment, and turn it into a movement? So I'm supposed to now give you directions for getting into small groups, but I forget those instructions. So I'm hoping someone, I defer to greater wisdom on this, someone would save me at this point. Take this microphone.
That was pretty awesome. Thanks, Helena, Sanoa, and Jamie for sharing all that with us. Is everyone ready to talk about it?
Yay!
Some people are, not everybody. Cool. Okay, so you have 5 options this morning. One option is that you could go to a really amazing, inspiring, and beautifully organized Reclaiming Feminism at the Grassroots Workshop with Helena Wong. So let's give it up for that. So if you want to go to that workshop, we're going to be talking about all this in the context of the idea of reclaiming feminisms and gender justice. And that's going to be in room 103, right down the hall here. So if you want to go to that, follow Helena there. Then we're going to have 4 other breakout groups that are going to go into 4 different rooms to discuss a version of the question that Jamie just described. So what I'm going to do is break the room into roughly 4 groups, and then if you're generally in that area, you can go to the room number that I tell you to go to. Sound good? So maybe if you're on like the part of the bleachers closest to me over here, like halfway through the bleachers and this way, if you want to go to room 101. From the bleachers from like the basketball, maybe from like where Brendan is. Brendan, you want to raise your hand? From Brendan and over, go to room 102. And then maybe also, let's see, there's a lot of people here. Okay, maybe all of these tables here, these white tables here, if folks want to go to room 212 upstairs, 212. And then if the back tables and the folks over here, is that too many? That's a lot, yeah. Okay, how about this table here where Ellen is? Raise your hand. Could you all folks, because there's some facilitators there too, go to room 212 with these folks. And then this group over here, and the groups in the back, room 214. Does that sound good? And then let's all meet back up in the auditorium for the closing assembly at 11:30.